Victor sat in his bulletproof office, his blood running cold as he stared at the hidden camera feed. He had installed the lenses to catch a monster hurting his paralyzed son. Instead, he watched the quiet, unassuming maid lock the bedroom door, pull a syringe from her apron and whisper, "They won't get away with this." Leo. In the criminal underworld of Chicago, the name Victor Romano was spoken with a mixture of reverence and absolute terror. As the undisputed head of the Romano crime syndicate, Victor controlled the docks, the unions, and a vast network of underground casinos stretching from the South Side all the way to Milwaukee. He was a man carved from marble cold, unyielding, and completely merciless to those who crossed him. But every fortress has a weak point, and Victor's was a 7-year-old boy named Leo. 14 months ago, a sleek black SUV had T-boned Victor's armored Cadillac on a rain-slicked stretch of Lakeshore Drive. The official police report called it a tragic hit-and-run, but Victor knew it was a targeted hit by the rival O'Connor family. Victor survived with a few broken ribs. His wife Clara died on impact. And little Leo, who had been laughing in the back seat just seconds prior, suffered catastrophic spinal trauma. Despite flying in the best neurosurgeons from Johns Hopkins and Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the verdict was absolute. Leo was paralyzed from the waist down. Worse, the psychological trauma had locked the boy in a silent prison. He hadn't spoken a single word since the night of the crash. Grief turned Victor into a paranoid tyrant. He moved his operations entirely to his heavily fortified compound in Highland Park, a sprawling 20-acre estate patrolled by armed guards and surrounded by 10-foot wrought iron fences. He fired the entire domestic staff, convinced that a mole had leaked his travel route on the night of the accident. For over a year, a revolving door of nannies, nurses, and maids came and went. Most lasted less than a week. They were either too terrified of Victor's lethal reputation, too impatient with Leo's silent, vacant stares, or simply too careless. Then came Nora Hayes. Nora was a 26-year-old former pediatric nurse recommended by Windy City Elite Care, a high-end domestic staffing agency that catered exclusively to Chicago's billionaires. Victor's background check on her was exhaustive. He had his top hacker dig into her digital footprint, bank records, and medical history. Nora had lost her nursing license at Rush University Medical Center 6 months prior under a cloud of suspicion. The hospital claimed she had been stealing liquid fentanyl, though formal charges were mysteriously dropped. Most employers would have run for the hills. Victor, however, saw an opportunity. A disgraced nurse with no family, no close friends, and desperate for money, was someone he could control. Their first interview took place in Victor's cavernous library, smelling of aged scotch and leather. Nora sat across from him, her posture rigid, but her emerald eyes strikingly defiant. She didn't tremble when Victor's heavily tattooed underboss, Dante, racked a shotgun in the hallway. She simply answered Victor's questions in a calm, husky voice. "I need someone to clean his room, feed him his meals, and administer his physical therapy," Victor had said, leaning over the mahogany desk, his dark eyes piercing hers. "You are not his doctor. You are not his mother. You will not ask questions about my business, and you will never, under any circumstances, take him out of this house. Do we have an understanding, Miss Hayes?" "I understand perfectly, Mr. Romano," Nora had replied softly. "But if I am to care for your son, I will do it my way. I won't treat him like a broken piece of furniture." Victor had almost shot her for the insolence. Instead, he hired her on the spot. But trust was a luxury Victor couldn't afford. The day before, Nora officially moved into the servants' quarters. Victor hired a private, off-the-books security contractor from a rogue tech firm in Silicon Valley. They installed military-grade microcameras inside Leo's bedroom and the adjoining playroom. The lenses were practically microscopic, one hidden inside the eye of a vintage teddy bear, another embedded in the casing of the smoke detector, and a third perfectly concealed within the bindings of a leather-bound copy of Treasure Island on the bookshelf. The live feeds were routed directly to a private encrypted monitor on Victor's desk and his personal encrypted smartphone. Nobody knew about the cameras. Not Dante, not the heavily armed perimeter guards, and certainly not Victor's new fiancée, Madeline, a stunning, calculating socialite whose father happened to be a powerful state senator Victor was keeping in his pocket. Madeline played the role of the doting future stepmother whenever Victor was around, but she complained incessantly about the gloom Leo brought to the estate. For the first 2 weeks, Victor obsessively watched the monitors. He would sit in his office long after midnight, nursing a glass of Macallan 25, watching the black and white infrared feed of Nora working in his son's room. What he saw began to chip away at the ice around his heart. He expected Nora to be lazy, or perhaps rough with the boy when she thought no one was looking. Instead, he witnessed a level of devotion that left him breathless. Nora would spend hours meticulously massaging Leo's atrophied legs, fighting off the stiffness with gentle rhythmic motions. While the previous nurses had turned on the TV and ignored the boy, Nora talked to him constantly. She read him stories, asked him questions, and waited patiently for answers she knew wouldn't come, treating his silence not as a burden, but as a conversation waiting to happen. Victor found himself mesmerized by her. He noticed the soft curve of her neck as she leaned over the bed, the gentle way she brushed Leo's dark curls from his forehead, and the fierce, protective energy that seemed to radiate from her small frame. But it wasn't just her tenderness that caught Victor's attention. It was her strange, almost clinical suspicion. Victor began to notice that whenever Madeline visited the room to bring Leo his afternoon snacks, Nora's entire demeanor changed. The sweet, gentle caretaker vanished, replaced by a hyper-vigilant hawk. She would stand in the corner, her eyes tracking Madeline's every move. Victor thought Nora was simply intimidated by the glamorous socialite. He couldn't have been more wrong. The cameras were about to reveal a truth so dark it would threaten to burn the entire Romano Empire to the ground. It was a Tuesday evening, raining heavily, the kind of torrential Chicago downpour that battered against the reinforced glass of the Highland Park mansion. Victor was trapped in a tense meeting in his downtown office regarding a shipment of weapons coming through the port of Montreal, but his eyes kept darting to the tablet resting next to his keyboard. On the screen, the feed from Leo's bedroom showed Madeline entering the room. She was dressed in a sleek designer dress, carrying a silver tray with a bowl of pureed butternut squash soup. "Here you go, little prince," Madeline cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She set the tray on Leo's bedside table. The boy didn't blink, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Nora, who had been organizing the closet, immediately stepped forward. "Thank you, Miss Madeline. I can feed him." Krr. Madeline shot Nora a look of pure, unadulterated venom, a look Victor had never seen his fiancée make. "Make sure he eats every drop, Nora. The doctor said he needs his nutrients. Don't be clumsy with it." "Of course," Nora said, keeping her eyes cast downward, playing the role of the submissive servant flawlessly. As soon as Madeline's heels clicked down the marble hallway and the heavy oak door clicked shut, Victor watched Nora's subservient posture evaporate. On the screen, Nora rushed to the door and turned the deadbolt, a direct violation of Victor's strict rules. "Never lock doors in my house," he had told her. Victor frowned, his hand instinctively, dropping beneath his desk to the loaded Sig Sauer he kept strapped there. He leaned closer to the monitor. Nora hurried back to the bed, but she didn't reach for the spoon. Instead, she reached into the deep pocket of her grey maid's apron and pulled out a small, sterile medical syringe and a tiny glass vial. Victor's heart stopped. What the hell is she doing? All the reports of her stealing drugs at Rush University flooded his mind. His blood boiled with a sudden violent rage. Was she sedating his son? Was she shooting him up with stolen narcotics to keep him quiet so she didn't have to work? He grabbed his phone to call Dante, ready to order his men to kick the door down and drag Nora down to the basement. But before his thumb could press the dial button, he noticed exactly what Nora was doing with the syringe. She wasn't injecting Leo. She was drawing liquid out of the bowl of soup. Victor froze, holding his breath as he watched the high-definition feed. Nora squeezed a few drops of the orange soup into the glass vial. Then she pulled a small plastic dropper from her pocket. It looked like a chemical reagent testing kit, and squeezed 2 drops of a clear liquid into the vial. She shook it gently. Within seconds, the liquid inside the vial turned a deep, inky black. Nora cursed quietly, the audio picking up her sharp intake of breath. She looked down at Leo, who was watching her with wide, terrified eyes. Nora knelt beside the bed, taking the boy's frail hand in hers. "I know, baby," Nora whispered, her voice trembling with restrained fury. "I know she's doing it. They won't get away with this, Leo. I promise you. I won't let them hurt you anymore." Victor sat in his office, his mind reeling as the puzzle pieces slammed into place with sickening clarity. The black reaction. Heavy sedatives. Benzodiazepines, or perhaps something worse, a slow-acting continuous paralytic toxin, like a micro-dosed synthetic muscle relaxant. Leo wasn't just suffering from psychological muteness. He was being chemically kept in a vegetative state. He was being actively, deliberately poisoned inside his own home. And the person delivering the poison was Madeline, the woman Victor was supposed to marry in 3 months. Victor watched as Nora took the bowl of soup to the adjoining bathroom and flushed it down the toilet. She thoroughly washed the bowl, then pulled a vacuum-sealed packet of organic applesauce from her bag food she had secretly smuggled into the house. She carefully spooned it into Leo's mouth, murmuring sweet, encouraging words, assuring the boy that he was safe. A massive, terrifying realization washed over the Mafia boss. Nora hadn't been fired from Rush Medical for stealing drugs to get high. She had taken the fall to protect someone, or she was quietly investigating foul play even back then. Now she was risking her life, risking the wrath of the most dangerous man in Chicago, to protect a paralyzed boy she had only known for a month. And Madeline was pushing to send Leo to a specialized facility in Switzerland. If Leo went away, he would likely die quietly of complications, leaving Madeline with no baggage and a clear path to Victor's vast fortune. The glass of scotch in Victor's hand shattered, the heavy crystal cracking under the immense pressure of his grip. Amber liquid and blood dripped onto his mahogany desk, but he didn't feel the pain. He only felt a cold, calculated wrath. He could have Madeline killed tonight. He could have her father ruined tomorrow. But if Madeline was slipping Leo toxins, she wasn't acting alone. The security checks on all food brought into the estate were rigorous. Someone in Victor's inner circle, perhaps Dante, or one of the perimeter captains, was supplying her with the drugs and bypassing the kitchen checks. If Victor acted blindly now, the real mastermind might slip away. He needed proof. He needed a list of names. And most importantly, he needed the one person in that house who was actually on his son's side. Victor grabbed his coat, ignoring the blood dripping from his palm, and stormed out of his office. "Get the car!" he barked at his driver waiting in the garage. "We're going back to the estate, now!" The drive from downtown Chicago to Highland Park usually took 45 minutes. Victor's driver did it in 25, the armored Maybach tearing through the rainy night like a black ghost. When Victor arrived at the estate, the house was dark and quiet. He bypassed Dante and the guards in the foyer, striding silently up the grand staircase. He approached Leo's door. It was well past midnight. Victor pulled out a master key, inserted it into the lock, and turned it with a soft click. Inside the room was dimly lit by a small nightlight. Nora was asleep in the armchair next to Leo's bed, her head resting on the mattress near the boy's hand. Even in sleep, she looked protective, a fierce guardian angel, exhausted from her watch. Victor stepped fully into the room, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the wall. He closed the door behind him and locked the deadbolt just as she had done earlier. The sound was loud enough to snap Nora awake. She gasped, bolting upright. When she saw Victor standing there, a dark, blood-stained handkerchief wrapped around his hand, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity, the color drained from her face, she instinctively threw herself over Leo, shielding the sleeping boy with her own body. "Mr. Romano!" She stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. I was just checking his vitals. I know I'm supposed to be in my quarters." Victor stepped closer, the sheer physical presence of the Mafia boss sucking the air out of the room. He didn't yell. He didn't pull his gun. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his encrypted smartphone. He tapped the screen, bringing up the recorded footage of her using the chemical test kit on the soup. He turned the screen toward her. Nora stared at the video, her breath hitching. She was caught. She knew what Victor did to people who kept secrets from him. She braced herself for the impact of a bullet or the rough hands of his men dragging her away. Instead, Victor lowered the phone. He looked at her, his dark eyes stripping away her defenses, laying bare the soul of the woman who had risked everything for his flesh and blood. "Show me the test results, Nora." Victor whispered, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver straight down her spine. "Show me the results, and tell me exactly how we are going to destroy them." Nora's emerald eyes darted from the glowing screen of Victor's phone to the blood dripping onto the carpet from his clenched fist. For a terrifying second, she thought he was testing her. She thought he was part of it. But as she looked into the hardened, ruthless face of the Chicago syndicate boss, she saw no deception. She saw only the raw, agonizing heartbreak of a father who realized his son was being tortured under his own roof. Slowly, her trembling stopped. The fierce maternal instinct that had driven her to risk everything surged back, steadying her nerves. She reached under Leo's mattress and pulled out a small locked metal lockbox. "I didn't steal drugs from Rush Medical, Mr. Romano," Nora said softly, her voice steadying as she unlocked the box. "I caught the chief of surgery running a black market pharmaceutical ring, substituting saline for critical medications. Before I could go to the medical board, he framed me. He had the power, and I was just a nurse. I swore I would never let someone with power hurt the vulnerable again." She opened the box, revealing a meticulously organized array of test tubes, chemical reagents, and a heavily annotated notebook. "When I first arrived, Leo's symptoms didn't align with standard spinal trauma," Nora explained, keeping her voice to a whisper so as not to wake the boy. His pupils were constantly pinpoint. His muscle flaccidity was unnatural, and he had periodic respiratory depression. 2 weeks ago, I started testing the food Miss Madeline brought him. She handed Victor the notebook. Pages were filled with dates, times, and chemical breakdowns. "It's a synthetic derivative of succinylcholine mixed with a heavy-duty benzodiazepine," Nora said, her professional tone cutting through the heavy silence of the room. "It's practically untraceable in standard toxicology screens. It paralyzes the vocal cords and suppresses the central nervous system. They aren't just keeping him quiet, Victor. They are slowly shutting down his organs. Given the dosage escalation over the past week, I estimate they planned for his heart to simply stop within the next month. It would look exactly like a tragic complication of his accident." Victor stared at the meticulous notes. The name Madeline was written next to every spiked meal. The betrayal felt like a serrated blade twisting in his gut. But beneath the fury, a profound sense of awe washed over him. He looked at Nora, this disgraced, penniless nurse who had stepped into the most dangerous house in Chicago and single-handedly waged a shadow war to save a child that wasn't hers. Victor reached out his large, blood-stained hand, gently grasping Nora's shoulder. His touch was surprisingly warm, sending an unexpected jolt of electricity through her. "You saved my son." Victor swore, his voice thick with a dark, terrifying promise. "I owe you a debt that blood and money can never repay, but this ends now. Who is supplying her?" "She can't be getting it from a street dealer," Nora said, shaking her head. "This is military-grade or highly specialized hospital stock. It requires cold storage. Someone on the inside of your security detail has to be bringing it onto the estate and bypassing the kitchen checks." Victor closed his eyes. The perimeter guards were strictly rotated. The only person with the authority to bypass the kitchen checks the only person who had unrestricted access to the estate's security logs was Dante, his underboss, his brother-in-arms for 15 years. If Dante was the inside man, this wasn't just an assassination attempt on a child, it was a coup. With Leo out of the way, Victor would be utterly broken, leaving a vacuum at the top of the Romano Empire that Dante could easily fill. And Madeline, always drawn to power and money, would happily switch her allegiances to the new king. "We need to catch them red-handed," Nora urged, stepping closer to Victor. "If you kill Dante now, without proof of the supply chain, the syndicate will fracture. The O'Connor family will use the chaos to wipe you out. We need them to make a move." Victor looked down at her. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a strategist. She was the only person in the world he trusted. "What do you suggest?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave, the space between them suddenly feeling incredibly intimate. "We give them the perfect opportunity." Nora whispered, her eyes flashing with a dangerous brilliance. "You leave the estate. Make it public. Make them think Leo is completely unprotected." Over the next 48 hours, the Romano estate became a stage for a deadly, silent play. Victor announced a sudden mandatory meeting with the heads of the 5 families in New York. He packed a bag, kissed a deeply relieved Madeline on the cheek, and drove out of the wrought-iron gates in a convoy of armored SUVs. Before leaving, he formally placed Dante in charge of the estate's security. "Keep my house safe, brother," Victor had said, embracing Dante. "With my life, boss." Dante had replied, his eyes betraying a momentary gleam of predatory triumph, but Victor never went to the airport. 2 miles down the road, he slipped out of the motorcade and into an unmarked black van operated by his Silicon Valley security team. They circled back to the estate, slipping onto the grounds through a forgotten Prohibition-era smuggling tunnel that only Victor knew existed. Hidden in the subterranean wine cellar, armed with a suppressed Heckler & Koch MP5 and flanked by 4 elite off-the-books mercenaries, Victor watched the camera feeds. Upstairs, Nora played her part flawlessly. She kept Leo comfortable, having secretly flushed the toxins and fed him clean food for days. The boy's color was already returning. His eyes tracked Nora around the room, sharp and aware. At exactly 11 p.m., the heavy oak door to Leo's room swung open. Madeline walked into the dimly lit bedroom, holding a small silver tray. On it sat a glass of warm milk. She wasn't wearing her usual designer gown. She wore a dark silk robe, her face devoid of her usual manufactured warmth. Behind her stood Dante, his massive frame blocking the doorway, a silenced pistol resting casually in his hand. In the cellar, Victor's blood turned to liquid nitrogen. "Time for his medicine." "Nora," Madeline said, smoothly stepping toward the bed. Nora stood up, placing herself directly between Madeline and the paralyzed boy. "I can give it to him, Miss Madeline." It's late. You should be resting. No. Madeline snapped the mask, finally slipping, revealing the rotting core of her soul. I'll do it tonight, and you are going to pack your bags. Dante is taking you to the train station. Your services are no longer required. Nora didn't flinch. I'm not leaving this boy. Dante stepped forward, raising the pistol slightly. Listen to the lady, sweetheart. You've been a good nurse, but your shift is over. Walk out that door, or you don't walk at all. Madeline pulled a syringe from her pocket, a massive dose, far larger than the microdoses she had been using. This was the kill shot. Victor is too weak to do what needs to be done, she sneered, looking down at Leo. This little vegetable is draining his focus. We're just putting the poor thing out of his misery. She pushed past Nora, raising the syringe toward Leo's IV line. I wouldn't do that, a voice echoed from the shadows. The adjoining bathroom door swung open, and Victor stepped into the room. Madeline shrieked, dropping the syringe on the carpet. Dante spun around, raising his weapon, but before he could even aim, the heavy reinforced glass of the balcony doors shattered inward. 4 of Victor's mercenaries poured into the room, laser sights instantly painting Dante's chest with glowing red dots. Dante froze, the color draining from his tattooed face. He looked at Victor, the pistol slipping from his grasp and thudding softly onto the floor. Victor, boss, it's not what it looks like. You swore to protect my house with your life, Dante? Victor said, his voice a terrifying, hollow calm. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on his former brother. Tonight, I collect on that debt. Victor nodded to his men. 2 of them grabbed Dante brutally, slamming him against the wall and zip-tying his hands. Madeline was hyperventilating, backing into the corner of the room, her hands raised in surrender. Victor, please. He forced me, Dante forced me to do it. I love you. I love Leo. Victor walked over to the syringe on the floor. He picked it up, examining the lethal clear liquid inside. He looked at Madeline, his expression devoid of any mercy. My men have already forwarded the contents of your private safe to the FBI, Madeline, Victor said softly. The ledgers proving your father's embezzlement, the offshore accounts, and the text messages between you and Dante. Your father will die in federal prison. And you are going to take the fall for running an unlicensed pharmaceutical ring. The feds are waiting for you at the front gate. No, Victor, you can't, she screamed, tears of genuine panic streaming down her face as the mercenaries dragged her out of the room by her arms. Victor, her screams faded down the hallway, leaving the room in a sudden, breathless silence. Victor stood there for a long moment, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from his veins. The Empire was safe. The rot had been cut out. He turned toward the bed. Nora was sitting on the edge of the mattress, her arms wrapped protectively around Leo. She was shaking the reality of the violence finally crashing over her. Victor dropped his gun on the armchair and knelt beside her. For the first time in his life, the ruthless Mafia boss didn't care about his image, his power or his pride. He gently took Nora's trembling hands in his own. It's over, he whispered, his dark eyes softening as he looked at her. They will never touch him again. You did it, Nora. You saved us. Nora looked up into his eyes, seeing the profound vulnerability hidden beneath his armor. The tension that had been building between them for weeks finally broke. Victor leaned in and his lips met hers. It wasn't a kiss of possession, but one of deep, undeniable reverence. Nora kissed him back, her hands sliding into his dark hair, anchoring herself to the man who had torn down his own empire to protect her and his son. A small raspy sound broke the silence. Victor and Nora pulled apart, looking down at the bed. Leo was looking at them. The heavy vacant fog that had clouded the boy's eyes for over a year was completely gone. His little hand twitched, reaching out to grasp Nora's sleeve. No, Nora. The boy croaked, his voice raw and unused but miraculously clear. Tears spilled over Nora's cheeks as she gently scooped the boy into a fierce hug. Victor wrapped his massive arms around both of them, burying his face in Nora's shoulder, a single tear escaping the Mafia king's eye. 3 months later, the Romano estate was transformed. The heavy gloom had vanished, replaced by the sounds of laughter echoing through the halls, and standing at the head of the Romano table wasn't a terrified maid, but a queen. Nora Hayes wore a diamond on her left hand that rivaled the stars ruling the most powerful syndicate in Chicago, alongside a man who worshipped the ground she walked on. She had walked into the lion's den to save a child, and in the end, she had tamed the beast. What did you think of Nora's incredible bravery and Victor's ruthless protection? Would you have risked everything to save a child in a dangerous Mafia household like Nora did? Let us know your favorite twist in the comments below. If you loved this intense Mafia romance and want more thrilling stories of betrayal, loyalty, and unexpected love, make sure to smash that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.